the students will decide that they're going to focus on China, or they're going to focus on Japan, or they're going to follow a new track that we have of multicultural possibilities. None of these, that's very new, so this doesn't pertain to the graduating class of this year. And at the master's, and we have a tiny, tiny, tiny little PhD program that it's not something we advertise very much. Students apply to work in China, East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, anywhere they want to, or in South Asia, India, Afghanistan area, or in Southeast Asia, because we have faculty in many of those areas of the world as well on campus. But there are departments that do those things at the undergraduate level, so we don't do South Asia and Southeast Asia at the undergraduate level. But I'm giving you more information than you want. These students at the undergraduate level are students in the College of Letters and Science, which is the largest college on the Berkeley campus. We have 17 or 18 such units. The College of Letters and Science gives a liberal arts degree. And I just want to be sure that everybody understands that as well, because this is part of your education. For many students, the Letters and Science liberal arts degree feels like a set of requirements that they have to get through. Breadth requirements, it's called. But it's conceived as broad for a purpose of true education. It's not training, it's education. They are learning how to learn in many spheres of knowledge. They are learning how to learn in many spheres of knowledge. This is in fact required of us as citizens in the 21st century. And if you follow careers, you don't know where that career is going to take you. Even if you join a big company, you don't know that that company is going to keep you in the same area within that company always. You need flexibility. You need to know how to learn various knowledges. And that's what those breadth requirements have been about. Also, you have learned communication skills. Also, you have had the opportunity to study at a university that has an incredibly diverse student population. This is something that employers want. They need it, because that's the reality of life. You need to be thinking about other people and what they care about, what their values are, and living and working with them, hopefully in peace. So that's what you're graduating with if you're an undergraduate. The graduate program, some of the students apply because they ultimately want to go on to a PhD program in a discipline, but they haven't decided yet which discipline. So they come and of course there's a number of disciplines, but they're pursuing what their interests are, just as the undergraduate students are. Other students in the MA program, however, are not intending to stay in academics. They are preparing for some kind of career that involves Asia in some way. Journalism, perhaps, or business, or economics, as David O'Leary did. So it's a program that we care for very much because it keeps us connected, not just within academia, but more broadly across. So this is what you're graduating from. You were a very lucky class to be here when the East Asian Library was opened. And I'm sure that each of you has spent many, many hours in that wonderful place. We have the only freestanding East Asia library, a library devoted to Asian materials anywhere in the United States on the university campus. And I recommend that if you haven't at least seen it from the outside, you stroll across campus and take a look at it. It's directly across from the main library. It's absolutely beautiful. So there are many things here to be proud of. Congratulations to you all. Now let me tell you more about Dr. Keiko Yamanaka. After earning a PhD in sociology at Cornell, Dr. Yamanaka taught at Ithaca College, Cornell College, and then was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard college before she came to Berkeley. For over 10 years, she's taught the Ethnic Studies Department, and more recently with the group in Asian Studies, which is certainly glad she decided to grace us with her expertise. She's a specialist in areas of transnational migration and social change, and is published widely in journals. She's invited to submit articles to collections of essays. An active researcher, she continues to travel to Asia for research purposes and for the purposes of keeping herself up to date on teaching. We all have to do this. You don't have faculty at Berkeley who get out of date. She frequently taught our core course, Asian Studies 10, which is, yes, I see smiles in the first 2 rows. She was the instructor for these students who are graduating, Asian Studies 10, our gateway course. She also mentors a number of our undergraduate and also graduate students on their projects. She often teaches special interest courses, topics courses we call them. And in fact, just this next semester, she's going to teach one called Asian Diasporas: History, Citizenship, and Identity. We are very proud to have her in the faculty of our group. Thank you for coming today. There's going to be a lot of applause today. I have to remember to shut my mouth and let it out. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I'm a professor of music. And I'm here because I'm the faculty chair of the group in Asian Studies. So it's my responsibility to oversee the administrative sorts of things, special appeals for exceptions and things like that, and to negotiate things through the university. That's my job, and it's a wonderful job because I get to meet people all over campus all the time, and I love that. My research fields, I started out in India, South Asian Studies, and I now am working for the past 15 years in Japan. So I go across more than one area of Asian Studies as well as an ethnomusicologist. Okay, I'm at 5 minutes. Now, Mr. David O'Rear. He received 2 degrees from the University of California, Berkeley. In fact, he's not the first in his family to receive degrees at Berkeley. If you count his grandmother, who took courses here but didn't actually enroll, from what I understand, he's the 3rd generation. And his uncles, and we have family here, 10 of them are here. They came for this occasion to hear him give the address. His BA degree was in political science. After he finished that degree, he went off to Taiwan to study Chinese language and came back to Berkeley to do a master's degree in Asian Studies. So he's an alum of our program. And then he moved to Asia. And he has been living in Asia ever since then. Hong Kong for the longest time. He's worked for the past 25 years as an analyst in the areas of economic, political, and business conditions. After 18 years with a group called the Economist group, he accepted the post of chief economist at the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce. He's a regular commentator on current events in print and electronic media. At the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce, Mr. O'Rear manages committees on economic policy, taxation, legal issues, shipping and transport, picture Hong Kong. These are important things. Real estate, and infrastructure. All those committees. He's responsible for drafting many of the Chamber's submissions to government on budget and policy issues. I would like to welcome David O'Rear for our commencement address.
Good afternoon, fellow bearers. This ceremony marks a major milestone in your lives, and graduating from one of the best universities is a tribute to your hard work and your superb accomplishments. It's a great honor for me to share with you some of my thoughts on the world we live in, and perhaps some ideas about how you can make it a better place. Some 30 years ago, I sat where you are today, listening to a speaker whose name I can't recall, and listening to them talk about something I can't remember. I was proud, I was excited, and maybe a little bit apprehensive about what I was going to be doing next. And perhaps you feel the same way today. When I was a student, there was a war in Afghanistan and another one in the Middle East. Threats to American jobs from manufacturing in Asia, worries about large federal budget deficits, complaints that taxes were too high and not enough attention paid to the environment. Like you, I was at Cal during one of the worst recessions in decades, and the job market didn't look any more promising as graduation approached. So not much has changed. We're still fighting wars, we're still worried about the economy, and we're still complaining about taxes and not doing enough about the environment. But the world has changed, and it's changed, I think, for the better. In the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to take you on a helicopter ride across the global landscape and point out a few landmarks along the way. Since we don't have all day, I'll set aside some of the obvious changes, such as superconductivity and maglev trains and the internet, and focus on just a couple of major events that have changed everything and some of their implications. First, the Cold War is long over, and the chances of us deliberately destroying our world are much less than they were in the past. We may well make planet Earth uninhabitable, but at least it'll be through neglect and ignorance and greed, rather than through hate and war. It may not seem like much, but it does give us a chance to avoid doing stupid things to our world. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union fell apart, and the world stepped back from 40 years of insane concepts such as mutually assured destruction and survivable nuclear warfighting. True, the slaughter in Africa continues in South Asia and Yugoslavia and elsewhere. But American politics and our policy and that of our allies isn't wholly committed to one side simply because Moscow is on the other side. Something's changed. We quickly stepped in when Kuwait was invaded, but hesitated to get involved in Bosnia until it became intolerable. Somalia, Rwanda, Sri Lanka were largely ignored as being beyond our national interests. We weren't allowed to do that before, during the Cold War. America didn't want to play the role of global policeman, and so we carefully selected when and where we would fight. Sometimes we got it wrong, and we were often criticized for selfish behavior, but no one else was willing to take the lead. Last year's uprising in Libya showed that other nations, particularly in Europe, can take the lead and relieve America of some of the responsibility of this role for keeping the peace and being sort of a global policeman. And I firmly believe that's a healthy development. The second major event, and one that's had a bigger impact directly on my life, is the emergence of China from decades of isolation. That country has not only joined the world economy, but also taken a position as the second most important nation on earth. Early in my time in Asia, in the early 80s, America welcomed Deng Xiaoping's reform program. We encouraged Beijing to do more in relaxing controls of the economy, reducing government subsidies, privatizing state-owned industries, and opening up markets to foreign investment and trade. To encourage those leaders we saw as taking China in a better direction, we offered incentives such as Most Favored Nation status, which was a substitute for being a member of the World Trade Organization, access to global capital markets, and access to our market for exports to our country. China responded with a comprehensive program to implement just about everything anyone thought was remotely possible. Well, it's obvious that they have not moved to full democracy or put the rule of law above politics. The structure and character of China's leadership has changed, and for the better. 30 years ago, we had trouble identifying which leaders to talk to, particularly at the subnational level. Today, we think we know who will be leading China and in what direction in the coming decade. I do, however, reserve the right to be wrong or surprised. The changes that have taken place in China are probably irreversible, and they have created an expectation that other countries can rapidly move from poverty to prosperity. Brazil, Russia, India, and China are now known as the BRICS, and South Africa wants to make sure that that S on the end has a real meaning rather than just a grammatical clarification. The combination of these formerly isolated economies opening up to the world economy has been and will continue to be profound. Let me illustrate with 3 points. First, by adding hundreds of millions of workers to the global labor force, China, India, Russia, and others from previously closed economies have changed the balance between capital and labor. We're only beginning to understand the full implications of what this means for the West. Still, after a global recession and financial upheaval, we can see that the consequences are going to be with us for a very long time. When Americans look back in the 1950s as that golden economic age, the tendency is to gloss over some of the inconvenient facts that only look at selected indicators. For example, it was a great time to be importing cheap oil and other raw materials, but not so nice to be a producer of those items in other countries. It was a great time to be a white male Protestant, but not so much so for women and minorities and peoples of other religions. Because such a large portion of the workforce was not formally employed, wages were generally good enough that one person could provide for a family. So we remember the good parts, but skip over the other bits. The addition of very large populations to the world economy since the 1980s has shifted the balance away from labor and more towards capital. Improvements in productivity have reduced the need for labor-intensive production, which has weakened unions in many rich countries. The emerging relative strength of capital vis-a-vis labor set the stage for extensive deregulation and was probably one of the reasons for financial bubbles growing out of control, and I suspect an important contributing factor to movements such as Occupy Wall Street, which in Hong Kong we call Occupy Central. When supply increases, prices tend to fall, and if you add 30 to 40% to the global labor force, you would expect that wages in real terms would fall or perhaps simply not rise as much as they might. So if one were looking into a crystal ball back in the 80s and could see the developments to come, you might conclude that it was going to be a period when it would be very, very difficult to improve on poverty or to eradicate it altogether. But that's not been the case. Precisely because billions of people have become part of the global economy, standards of living are rising as never before. And so the second observation I'd like to make is that we are experiencing right now the greatest increase in standard of living for the most people of any time in human history. Let me say that again. We are experiencing the greatest increase in the standards of living for the most people of any time in human history. Billions of farmers have become factory workers. And because their children go to school, they can expect that they will be working with their brains rather than with their backs. Cheap and readily available communications is now possible in places that were barely connected a few decades ago from village to village. Women are slowly earning the right to own their own property, to make their own decisions about marriage and work, and to expect to see their children grow and learn and live a better life. Most important of all, through the poverty eradicating power of globalization, we are making it much harder to reverse our way back into protectionism and confrontation and isolationism. 30 years ago, half the world was in dire poverty. Today, that isn't the case. Let's not be naive about it. There are still too many people in the world who don't have enough food or clean water, hygiene facilities, schools, or jobs. But there are fewer people in dire poverty than there were before. Worldwide, the number of people living below the poverty line is now some 500 million fewer than when I was a student. Much more impressive, this is a reduction from half of the world population to a quarter, in spite of the growth of the total population. In India, the share living below the poverty line has declined from 60% to 40%. And in China, there are 650 million fewer people in poverty, an absolute decline of 78% since 1980. 30 years ago, the infant mortality ratio was 77 per 1,000. Today, it's below 41. Nearly 2/3 of the world has access to improved sanitation facilities compared to less than half 20 years ago. So this trend is confirmed by independent measures such as caloric intake, disease eradication, or inoculation ratios. We are winning the war on poverty, but we don't seem to acknowledge it. Thanks to 24-hour news and the always-on internet, we know much more about greater portions of our world than we did in the past. We see the problems more clearly, and familiarity makes them seem larger. But the fact is that we have turned the corner, and people's lives are changing, and for the better. The third point, or observation I'd like to make, is that we are, for the first time, seeing emerging economies that don't need to be led by the hand by the wealthy world. In the past, countries were seeking to join the world economy would be instructed on how to behave, how to organize their economies, and how to pay for loans or directed investment. Now, things are different. Today, countries like China are able to fend off pressure from more developed economies. Some people look at China and don't like what they see, from political repression to worker exploitation, corruption, environmental degradation, and mercantilist economic policies. But we in the West don't have the kind of levers that we used to have in the past to modify other countries' behavior. We have to accept that. In real terms, China's economy today is 2,000% larger, according to their figures, than it was when I first visited in 1981. At least that's what the official data show. And I should caution you that statistics are not all that good in different parts of the world. They're not universally reliable and need to be confirmed by on-the-ground observation and analysis. Shenzhen, just across the border from Hong Kong, consists of rice paddies and water buffalo in the early 80s. Today it has more than 10 million people with, they say, an average income of $15,000 US per person. From water buffalo to air conditioners in a generation. I honestly can't imagine what the world would look like if China could continue doing that for another 30 years. Or if India or sub-Saharan Africa could duplicate that progress in the next 30 years. I don't know what it would look like, but I think it would be a better place. It's popular these days to speak about the end of the American century and the rise of China as the world's largest economy. Certainly the hard economic numbers, if we can believe them, point to China being a larger economy than America in 10 or 20 years, but that's not the whole story. For China to replace or duplicate America's role today is going to take many decades and much sacrifice. I have an open mind as to whether the current or future generation of Chinese leaders really wants to be the first one called when Tunisia needs help or Southern Europe needs a bailout. Nevertheless, China has created a model for growth, and in doing so, is challenging the existing world order. They will take a larger role in both regional and global affairs, and they will do it from a position of what is best for their own national interests. I remind you, that's exactly what we did. We like to think that we had higher motivations, but far too often it was simple national interest, not just go in and correct problems in Rwanda, for example. Your job over the next several decades is to figure out how we can accept this inevitable change and do it without undermining the foundations of our society. It won't be easy, but by choosing a course of study that requires you to think outside the box, to compare different cultures, you're moving in the right direction. We have enormous problems that my generation is counting on your generation to solve. I think that line was used when I was sitting on that side. Some are longer term, such as climate change and the emerging shortage of potable water threatening the lives and livelihoods of many people around the world. Other challenges are more immediate, like here I'm thinking about the possible collapse of the euro, financial deleveraging among households and businesses and governments, and multiple trillions of dollars of sovereign debt that may depress growth in developing economies for many years to come. These are real problems, and they're going to require multilateral and bipartisan cooperation to solve them without further social disruption. Let me conclude with a little bit of my own story and how I turned an Asian Studies degree from Cal into a rewarding, fascinating ride through life. Contrary to popular belief, we did have computers, but the idea of everybody owning one was still a few years away. I remember going to the computer science hall at 3 in the morning to run a box of punch cards. That's the chance you had to use it as an undergrad. So I didn't click on a URL and Skype somebody in the other side of the world to see what was going on. I had a bit of a problem trying to figure out what was going on over there, so I did what any sensible person would do when I graduated. I became an illegal alien. I became an ethnic minority. I packed up and moved out of my comfort zone, which was the Center for Chinese Studies library in the basement of Barrows Hall. I moved out of my apartment and out of my country. For the first time in my life, I became an ethnic minority, illegal alien. Someone barely able to speak the language and not legally allowed to work in the place I chose to live. That was Taiwan. The reason I went to Taiwan was because China wasn't welcoming unaffiliated, unemployed, minimally fluent Americans, and Taiwan was. It was my best opportunity. And so I suppressed my fears, sold my car, and took a leap of faith. I really love that car. Cherry red 1967 Mustang. I never bought another either, because where I live you don't need a car. And I haven't lived in the United States for more than a couple of weeks since I left Cal. Living abroad has helped me to better relate to what I had studied. I developed friendships and contacts with people from a dozen countries and from a dozen different places in the United States. Although I remember him from his days as governor, I didn't experience firsthand the Ronald Reagan presidency or the next 4. I wasn't here on 9/11, but I saw Tiananmen Square up close and personal in 1989. I'm clueless at quizzes about American pop culture in the last 30 years, but I've watched as closed societies opened up and open ones flourish. I didn't witness the social media revolution that you all take for granted, but I did see dictatorships in Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia become democracies. I'm hoping we can soon add Burma to that list. So my first step after graduation was to get a passport and put it to use. If you haven't traveled already, get a passport and put it to use. And if you have traveled already, don't stop. Travel today costs the same as it did when I was graduating, which means it's a whole lot more affordable. The second step is to find something that you want to do to get some experience, because you need to get that in order to move on to what's really going to be meaningful in your life. My first job wasn't particularly great. In my first year out of grad school, I made $14,000 that year in today's money. So be willing to accept a job that doesn't pay well in order to get the experience you need. My cost of living was low, and my language skills were improving very quickly, so I wasn't too fussed about the salary. That job gave me the basic experience I needed to get another job that I loved for 18 years. I moved from Taiwan to Hong Kong and began doing the kind of political and economic analysis that I'd studied here at Cal. During the next several years, I had the opportunity to travel around Asia, and in doing so, I met some very senior government and business people. And I discovered that Cal has a better reputation in Asia than it does in America, which is saying a lot. In Indonesia, there was a group called the Berkeley Mafia. They were graduates of Cal who went to Indonesia and changed that country back in the 50s and 60s. They were a coherent group of technocrats. The connections, including the overseas alumni connection that I've facilitated, has opened doors that I didn't even know existed. I suppose my last point is you really need to love the work you do. Most people know, that I know, spend 50 or 60 hours a week working, or my wife, more like 75. And many of them are fairly satisfied with the work they do, but very few, and I consider myself fortunate to be one of those, really enjoy what they do in their careers. You have to work to pay the bills, but life's too short to work for a paycheck alone. Make a difference somehow. Let me give you one example of the rewards of making a difference. My wife and I have been very strong advocates for a new liberal arts university in Bangladesh. The Asian University for Women was set up about 4 years ago in Chittagong. We've traveled there a couple of times to teach and attend conferences, and we've been involved in a support group in Hong Kong that helps raise awareness and money and seek out opportunities for the students for internships and jobs. From our experience, seeing how these young women have grown and transformed themselves in just a few short years, we believe they're going to change the world, or at least that part of it they choose to live in. From our perspective, the time and money spent is very, very good investment. And if you're looking for something rewarding to do in the next couple of years, consider going to Bangladesh and teaching at a school that would really appreciate the kind of education you have. You'll be teaching alongside some very good scholars. They have professors from most of the Ivy League schools, as well as the equivalents around the world. The world is very different today. We've all been eliminated the tyranny of distance. From your generation, we hope to think beyond the narrow confines of location, society, nationality, language, and religion. The internet has handed you the world on a smartphone, and it's up to you to decide what to do with it next. Class of 2012, my advice to you is to get a passport, put it to use, find a place in the world where you can exceed your own expectations and make a difference. I wish you the very best of luck. I look forward